I've watched your debates. I've watched your different things that you've done. So you said slavery, feudalism, and capitalism. Okay, so slavery and feudalism versus capitalism. Slavery and feudalism have one underlying difference between capitalism, because in feudalism and slavery, you don't have a choice. There are no choices. You know, they tell you what to do and you better do it. In capitalism, they tell you what to do and you have a choice. You can say, screw you, I'm leaving you, I resign. You know, a lot of times people think just because somebody is a CEO, there's such a powerful, incredible life that they live and they'll never get fired. But the truth of the matter is, CEOs get fired more often than employees do, because every time an employee leaves a guy or a CEO to another company and takes the trade secrets, that's a form of being fired. Every time a client leaves, it's a form of being fired. So you cannot say feudalism and slavery and compare it to capitalism. That's pretty, today a lot of millennials would say, Richard, you're reaching. That's what they would say to you.
Well, let me respond, okay? You remember the story of Robin Hood?
Okay, yes, I do. I've watched it many times.
Okay. Let me remind you, Robin Hood's merry band of men in the woods, those were runaway serfs. Turns out serfs had a choice. They could stay underneath the lord on the feudal manor where they were probably born, or they could try to break away from that situation. They could run into the forest and join up with Robin Hood. They could get beyond the reach of the lord, whose reach was usually quite limited. Yeah. They could set themselves out to then become what were called free peasants or yeomen or small farmers. There were, in fact, all kinds of options that they had. They were risky, but, you know, leaving your job in a capitalist economy, that's risky too. In fact, having a job in capitalism is risky. Right now, we've got 35 million people who just got fired. It turns out employment is risky. Slaves also, by the way, ran away. Slaves also made revolts. Slaves also carved out for themselves much better conditions than they had been born into through a variety of mechanisms. The portrayal of all of them as unfree, which is the way the literature does it, and capitalism as free, strikes me as an extraordinary reach, since the vast majority of people who are employed by a capitalist, an employer, either live with that or they're free to quit, in which case their basic option is to go be an employee of somebody else as an employer, which is not quite the escape you might want to recommend. It's a choice, but it's not a choice to escape the system, because you really can't do that in most cases. And if you were to suggest that an employee can go out and start his own business, most of them really can't. And many of those who do end up in a situation that many small businessmen and women will tell you about, which is they work harder than the people who are employees and look longingly at the possibility of going back to be an employee, because however ugly and unpleasant it was, working for yourself can be even worse.
So now you touched on a lot of things, so let me take them one at a time. I took notes. I'm taking notes here. So you're the professor, I'm the student, I'm taking notes here.
All right.
So let's talk about Robin Hood. So Robin Hood was taking money from who and giving it to who?
He was taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. That was his specialty.
But was it really the rich he was taking money from, or was he taking money from the government who was taxing people too much, Richard? You got to tell the true story of Robin Hood. Well, I grew up in Iran. I watched it a few hundred times. So He wasn't taking money from the rich. He was taking money from the government that are so noble. They want to do such good things for the people.
No.
And he was giving it to the people.
Maybe you and I read all the Mr. Robin Hood story a little different.
I watched it in Farsi. Maybe the translation was incorrect. I don't know.
I don't know either. But here's the way I read it. Yeah, he was against the government because he saw the government as in the clutches of the rich. And so for him, whether he stole from a rich traveler going through the forest, or he had pitched battles with the sheriff of Nottingham, if you remember his arch enemy, For him, the distinction between the rich people and the politicians those rich people had in their pocket was a difference he didn't care much about. He would take from either one of them or both of them and give to the people that they together were putting on the short end of the stick.
Yeah, I don't. If you're asking about some of the, so again, it goes back to the taxation. They were taxing the hell out of the people. The government was these noble people that eventually a greedy person comes and they abuse power. But if there's one part that I get from Robin Hood is the following: you do need laws and you do need lawyers. If you look at China back in 1984, China only had 4 law schools. You know the whole Milton Friedman argument when he says you don't really need laws and just kind of leave it alone. That argument is not going to work 100%. You need law and you need lawyers, right? They had 4 law schools in 1984 and only 2,000 lawyers. And China had to make sure they get laws, or else the powerful businesses without some sort of regulation and laws would abuse other people. So that part, absolutely, I agree, because today you're seeing a lot of that taking place in many industries. Whoever can get the best lobbyists that can pay the most money to people that they can control and campaign with, they can pass a lot of the laws. But when you say the rich and the poor, I sometimes wonder what direction you go from there. As far as the people that are employees who cannot be rich, you're saying poor people cannot be rich. Rich, do you know how many people last year filed their taxes that they made $1 million? How many people in America do you think filed taxes that they made $1 million? What do you think that number is?
I don't know.
Income. What do you think? I'm actually curious to know what you think.
Good question. No statistic in my head comes to my mind, but
this is from the IRS. It's a government organization that you trust.
Yeah. No. Listen, you want to paint me as an advocate of the government. I'm not. That's not. I don't trust the government. I don't see the government as an independent.
Thank God, man, because we're on the same page there. That's good to hear. Okay.
But
so how many people last year made $500 million?
I don't know what a number is.
I actually am curious to know what you think. So you and I are having a drink together. I don't know if you drink. We're having coffee, hot chocolate. We're having a beer. And you're talking, we're shooting the you know what. And I say, Richard, how many people last year made $1 million in taxes? What would you say?
4 million.
4 million people, you said, made $1 million.
Yeah.
So the way you did the math was 330 million. You did 1%, a little over 1%. Of the 330 million, half of them can't work because they're kids or they're older. So working employees, we have 150 million people in America that actually work. And out of the 150 million that work, 1% makes around 460. 1% makes 460. If you know how they say you're in the 1%, you make 460. 500,000 people last year filed in their income taxes that they made over $1 million. 500,000. It's not like it's only 18 people. It's not like it's only 62,000 people. It's 500,000 people last year made $1 million in America. If you and I were talking and you were to say, I climbed Mount Everest and I'm the only one that did it after 65 years old. You're the only one. I'd be like, oh my, I could never do it. I have a hard time sometimes climbing my office here, 3 stories. I'm going crazy. You climb Mount Everest. That's impossible. I get that argument that not everybody can climb Mount Everest. But if, Richard, 500,000 people in America can make $1 million, don't you think 1 million people can make $1 million? Don't you think more people can make $1 million?
No.
You don't believe that?
No, not for 1 minute.
Seriously?
Yeah.
What's your argument? How do you argue that part, though? So 500,000, Richard, made $1 million last year. Right. It's a lot of people.
Right. But in order for there to be 500,000 people who make $1 million, then there have to be an awful lot of people who make very little, which we've always had. Capitalism has always produced and reproduced vast numbers of poor people. As a system, it is very efficient in reproducing vast poverty. It might be nice to focus on the rich at the other end, but they are relatively small in number compared to those who really are having a hard time. And you could, I suppose, blame it on the individual. That would be very convenient for those who are rich, because then they could claim, oh, it's because of me, rather than a system that assigns these roles. But the master knew that the reason he was a master was because his father and mother were masters. And the slave understood that he was.
You're saying in the world of business, or you're saying the master who owned slaves?
The master who owned slaves.
Okay. Okay.
And the slave understood he was a slave mostly because his mother and father were slaves, and that's how the system reproduced the people. And at the top of capitalism, there is a relatively small class. I went to school with them for 10 years. I really do know them pretty well, and a good number of them are my friends to this day. But that's a self-reproducing group that does let others in from time to time.
You got to stop hanging around with Harvard, Yale, and Stanford people. You got to get out and go to Glendale Community College. You got to get out and go to some regular people like us who are not at your level of brilliance and intelligence and your peers at Harvard. You got to come and hang out with us a little. You've been hanging around with too many elitists and powerful people, Richard. Some of us small people are regular people.
No, that was over when I was, when I got my PhD at Yale. They always looked at me as somebody who must have been dropped on the floor by his mother at an inopportune moment when he was a baby, because he went in this other direction. You're not supposed to go to become a critic of capitalism if you go to Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. If you're not familiar, let me assure you that my teachers, with very, very few exceptions, were cheerleaders for capitalism. Every time.
What year is this? What year is this? What year is this?
I entered Harvard in 1959, and I finished my education at Yale in 1970.
That makes sense. A lot has changed in 50 years.
But I've been a professor at those and other universities ever since. And in my humble opinion, nothing has changed. It is the same today. I mean, I go around the country, I speak every year in, 20, 25 college and university settings, from state schools and community colleges all up to private universities. And the combination of ignorance, there's no nice way to say this, the combination of ignorance about capitalism and socialism and all these kinds of questions, and the combination of that ignorance for many and a kind of weird confidence in a point of view for which they have no support at all, teaches me, since these are perfectly nice and intelligent people, that this remains a taboo topic for most kids. They do not, as they go through college, whether it's community college or a university, they are not exposed. They can't be to anybody who takes this stuff, the critique of capitalism, seriously. They're just not given the opportunity. By the way, half the time they invite me, it's precisely to kind of open a little space in a curriculum that would otherwise not touch it.
I don't know about that. I think I went to Harvard for a OPM program, meaning an owner president management program. It's like a 3-week program you go to, right, and you have to do a certain amount of dollars per year to qualify for it. So I went to it, and it was the time where Trump and Hillary were debating, okay?
Right.
And so in one of the halls, this is, we're opening up the debate. Teachers showed up, professors showed up, everybody showed up. And I'll just go in there, and I'll sit in the corner just to watch to see what happens. Richard, 100% of people hate it passionately. Your favorite person in the world that you have a painting on the wall right next to you, President Trump, they hate it. They hated President Trump, and they were all like bowing down to how amazing, Hillary Clinton was. I'm talking 500-600 people, and I'm just like sitting there watching, and I'm like, wow, this is a guy that voted for Clinton, and this is a guy that voted on the left and the right, and he's a registered independent today. So I'm watching these guys. I'm like, wow, this is pretty wild. So now when I hire people and then they come from schools, they come out of UCLA, if they come out of Harvard, if they come out of Berkeley, it's obviously where Berkeley's at. If they come a lot of these schools, even Yale, the reason why a Sanders was able to get as much traction as he did is a byproduct of the last 30 years. Socialism's getting a lot of through education and school, and a lot of socialists are able to pass their agenda to kids, and kids are thinking about it. You're seeing that. It's not like I'm the first person that's telling you this. So
stop, Patrick. I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with the fact that the spirit of socialism is in universities today?
Absolutely. Let me explain to you what I mean. First of all, I don't like Hillary Clinton. I would not have bowed down to Hillary Clinton then. I wouldn't do it now. She is, for me, the other side of the same coin that Mr. Trump is on the other side of. And I don't want that coin, neither the one side nor the other. A socialist perspective, as far as I understand it, has a, finds the distinction between those two of them minimal. It's not zero, but it's minimal. And an excited supporter of either of them, you would not find me to be. Now, on the question of Bernie and the interest in quote unquote socialism, I go all over the country. I really do. I interact with these people all the time. And here's what I can tell you, which may comfort you, may upset you, I don't know. They are not pro-socialist, whatever they say on their polls. What they are is bitter and angry that what they took to be the promise of capitalism isn't available to them. They are loaded up with debt going through their college. The quality and quantity of jobs they can get with their BA is worse than it's ever been. They were led to expect by their parents, by their minister, by the community they grew up in, a set of opportunities that are fast disappearing. And they know it from talking to one another. They feel, to be blunt, betrayed by capitalism. That's what they're saying when they say, well, what's wrong with socialism? Because it really isn't that socialism has captured them or that they even know much about it. It's their way of giving the finger.
I agree with
to
what you just said. I actually agree with what you just said. And I totally agree with what you just said. But this is the part I agree with. Let me explain. So you said it's not that, you know how nowadays they say people don't vote for somebody, they vote against somebody. You've heard this before your entire career. Okay.
Yes.
So they're bitter at capitalism. Okay. So now go to capitalism. So now the next question I'll be asking you is what is the definition of capitalism to you? Because you went straight from capitalism to college debt. That college debt is not capitalism. College debt is controlled by the government being able to push every debt through them to find a way to make more money. College could be 1/6 of a cost what it is today. When you got a Harvard University sitting on $40 billion of endowment, and they took a $8.55 million check from the government just 2 months ago because of coronavirus, and they're sitting on $40 billion. Colleges are more expensive because of government. If you look at that, debt is higher due to government. They don't have to lower the interest rates the way they are to where it is today. Giving money away constantly to bail people out, that's the government's ties. That's not a capitalistic system. A true capitalistic system is not the involvement of the government trying to bail out somebody's too big to fail companies. So I'm not coming from a place of let's go bail out another of these big companies and let's not prevent them from going out of business. If they screw up, they should go out of business. But that's not capitalism. That is and I'll finish up and I'll give you, turn it over to you. That is a interpretation of these teachers who have jobs making 49 grand a year, 62,000 a year, 82,000 a year if they're professors or maybe higher ups, private school. Most teachers, don't make a lot of money. They make 36,000, 40,000. I don't see teachers getting up saying, capitalism's awesome, guys. I don't see that. I see teachers for 16 years saying how bad capitalism is and how bad rich people are because they're not the happiest people in the world. 16 years later, these 22-year-old kids are like, dude, these rich people suck and capitalism sucks. Who's against rich people? Bernie? I'll freaking vote for this guy. That's how I see the process in taking place. What do you think?
Good. I'm glad you put it that way. So let me tell you how and why I disagree with what you said. I find it somewhere between amusing and ironic that the defenders of capitalism have had to resort, particularly in recent decades, to what I take to be a hustle. It's like selling you snake oil medicine that's going to cure you of everything.
Wow.
Here's the hustle. Wow. When there's unemployment in this country, it's because the employer has fired you. When you lose your home, it's because the bank or the lender has foreclosed on you. So when you have a system that periodically, every 4 to 7 years, has a crash, in which millions of people are thrown out of work, I mean, the instability of capitalism is stupefying. or it produces enormous inequality, which these days is also stupefying, you run the risk that people will, in fact, turn against the system that they've been told is what they are living in, namely capitalism. So it was a smart move. Hustler is a mixed thing, good and bad. It was a good hustle to say, hey, given our system, it's going to piss off an awful lot of people. We need to train those people to blame something other than the system. And the target that was chosen, and this is very old, is the government. So you have this phenomenon in America. Unemployed people don't blame the employer who fired them. They blame instead the government. They find something that they can point to that the government is the bad guy lying behind and causing the nice employer to fire me, or the nice banker to dispossess me of my home and destroy my family and all the rest of it. This remarkable, and Ayn Rand is obviously with all of this notion that the government is the bad guy, which neatly avoids the question, gee, why would the government be the bad guy? Is that intrinsic to government? Some people say yes.
Well, historically, they've been the bad guy.
Historically and in the present. I mean, the blaming the government is an American pastime. It's more popular than baseball.
I lived in Iran, we said it. I lived in Germany, they said it. The government historically has been the biggest bully in the world. That is proven.
No, careful. It has been said by people who want the blame for a system failure not to go on the system.
No,
that's a bit of a hustle. I would explain what the government does because of who controls the government, who has the predominant influence. Governments do what they are pressed to do. You know who writes the laws in this country. It's the lobbyists. And you know, I hope you know, that 90% of lobbyists come from capitalist enterprises. Nobody else can afford it. You know, the big donations come from the richest people who are enriched mostly by big business, et cetera, et cetera. The government is the agent, not of all of us, but of those of us who have the ability to shape and influence what the government does. Blaming the government is very useful to get the capitalist system off the hook, but I don't take that seriously. For me, the government is another arm of the system. The system works, some of its magic through private enterprise, and some of its magic through the government's shaping and interaction. And for me, that's what socialism, one of its important insights, is to understand that the pretense of the government as an independent actor in the society is mostly phony, it's false, it's not what's going on. And that the change, therefore, can never just be elect Tweedledum or elect Tweedledee. Clinton, Trump, yes, they're different, but in many ways, they're the same. I don't know if you saw it a few years ago, Nancy Pelosi was giving a talk somewhere in a college, and a young man raised his hand and asked her about socialism. And you could tell, because the video was right on her, she was very perplexed. And she looked kind of befuddled, took a few extra seconds, and then looked at the young man perfectly nicely and said, I really don't know what you're referring to. We are all capitalists now.
I've seen that.
Yeah, perfect. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly right. Capitalism has two political parties in the United States.
What's your point, though? What's your point with that?
The point is that the government should not be made the fall guy. It's not appropriate. The government is not an independent actor.
It's not the fall guy. It's not the fall guy. That's not what I'm saying. Let me explain what I mean by being a fall. By the way, Richard, historically, you cannot dispute the fact that government's not bullied people. I mean, you can't dispute that. I understand today, some people are massive corporations. They can push people around. They can censor people. They can do a lot of things today. And no one's disputing that part. But what I'm talking about is with you talking about, the power government pushes around and some things they do. So earlier you said you're also not a government guy. Now you're saying it's an escape that the capitalists use to blame it all on governments. So let me ask you this question. What is the only way I can have a monopoly? With the help of who? What is the only way I can have a monopoly? Can I have a monopoly all by myself? Is it possible for me to build a business and be the biggest and have a monopoly all by myself? Or do I need someone's help?
According to everything that the discipline of economics has ever argued, the answer is for sure you can do it by yourself.
There's no way in the world I can do it by myself. No way in the world I can. Let me explain to you why I cannot do it by myself. So I need the laws to be on my side, because I need you who work for the state, that your campaign's coming up, to tell you, I need you to make the barrier to enter very, very tough and allow me to buy that company for $17 billion to put my competition out of business, for me to own a monopoly. And without your approval, I can't have a monopoly, because with your approval, if you follow the law, I get stopped. I can't make certain moves. The only way you see monopolies is with the help of the government coming in and saying, don't worry about it, I'll help you out. Let's go make this monopoly happen. Or else it's not possible. It's not possible to do so.
Let me give you the counter argument. We have two basic laws in the United States against monopoly.
Okay.
Right? One is the Sherman you know the story. Okay. Those laws were fought for by the victims of monopolies that had come into power independent of governmental support. The whole purpose of those laws was to not only prevent the government from helping monopolies, but to put the government in the business of breaking up the monopolies that had formed on their own. In economics, here's how the logic works. So if you look at the cost of producing a commodity over time, the line, the cost curve, it's called in economics, keeps going down. It's basically the law of the larger the quantity of goods you produce, the cheaper each unit costs you. And that's kind of built into modern technology.
Sure.
So if you have 500 firms competing, each one trying to capture the market for whatever, the one that gets the jump for whatever reason in step one to be able to sell more X's than the other guy will be able to produce at a lower cost. Eventually, when you follow the logic, there's one guy left. The one who produced the largest amount, therefore got it to the lowest cost, could charge the lowest price, and that would outcompete all the others. Monopoly is the product of competition. The irony of, by the way, this is in Adam Smith, not just Karl Marx and others. The logic of capitalism is a competitive system that destroys itself. And that has in fact happened and led to the opposition of other companies and the public who don't want to be ripped off by this process.
Can you elaborate and define destroys itself? What does destroys itself mean? Like a company, I'm competing and then I get too casual, too lazy, somebody else comes and destroys me? Is that what you're saying?
No. This is a situation where there's 500 companies producing, I don't know, potato chips.
Okay.
And one of them comes across a new kind of potato and it goes better. So he can sell more potato chips than the next guy. Because he can sell 10 million bags instead of 2 million bags, he can produce potato chips at less per bag than it costs the other guys who produce a smaller amount. So because he can produce at a lower cost, he drops the price. That swings the demand over to his product and away from the others who can't afford to match him because they don't have the low cost since they don't have the big output. Eventually, one guy is able to get the entire market and he will produce at the lowest possible price and the lowest possible cost. The others go out of business because at the price he charges, close to what his cost is, they can't compete. And so he's left all alone. Once that moment is reached, once he has no more competitors, then he can begin to jack up the price because you don't have anywhere else.
Give me one example. Give me one example of that today. One example of that today.
Why you want it today? It's all through history.
No, give it to me today. Give me one example of that today.
Microsoft.
Microsoft?
Amazon.
Amazon doesn't have competition and Amazon charges up prices. What's expensive on Amazon?
Amazon has driven almost everybody out of
But what is expensive on Amazon? Name me one thing that's overpriced on Amazon, Richard. Your argument, I want to give it to you. Tell me one thing.
That's not my argument.
You said eventually they raised the price. I'm just repeating what you said. Tell me one thing that's overpriced on Amazon.
They're not ready to at that point yet. They're not the only deliverer.
That's just not possible though, because right now Amazon is scared shitless of Walmart. Right. They're scared shitless of Walmart. That's because capitalism works. Now, my concern is the following. My concern is Bezos moves to DC. He moves to DC. That scares me. He moves to DC. He gets in the pocket of lobbyists. I'm not sitting here, oh my gosh, Jeff Bezos is the greatest entrepreneur. That's not what I'm saying. My concern is his next move is to buy politicians to be able to bully the other guys. That's my concern. I'm not okay for that. But you cannot tell me that the prices at Walmart or Amazon are so expensive. That doesn't make any sense because it's not true.
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by expensive. But I would tell you that they also make very careful arrangements not to put each other in that competitive situation.
No,
They're exactly aware of what I told you. They're aware that this is a race to see who gets to be the one with the lowest cost, and that whoever that is,
customer wins.
Wait a minute, that's the way the game is played, and that's how you go out of business. These companies then can get together when they've gone down from 50 or 500 to only 6 or 7, and then they work out an arrangement. The history of antitrust is the history of the government breaking in at those times because, like with Amazon and Walmart, there's a reason that Bezos is the richest man in the world and the Walmart family is the richest in the world. They have jacked up the prices above their cost.
Oh my gosh.
In a way because they have no competition.
It's the complete opposite argument. The argument is John Doe's market in Toledo was selling milk for $4.59. Walmart came in and says, this guy's charging it for too much. We'll sell it to you for $3.59. John had to lower it to $3.49 to be able to compete. It's the complete opposite argument there. No, that argument doesn't have weight behind it, Richard.
It does. It's always been the history. You lower the price, you drive out your competitors, and when you have reached down to 3 or 4...
There's not one example of it today. There's not one example of it today.
Listen, that's the history of the automobile.
But I'm telling you today, you don't have one example of that today. One.
We had a dozen.
What is overpriced? What are you buying that's overpriced? What are you buying that's overpriced?
Everything you buy from Amazon and Walmart is priced higher than a competitive alternative would price it.
What are you talking about? Everything I buy on Amazon is cheaper than the other places I buy. That's why people are buying on Amazon.
That's
so
right.
if you would have taken the argument the other way around, that's where I get stuck. So here's a suggestion for you to know that a capitalist gets stuck. The part that I get stuck is if you say to me, well, what about poor Bobby that runs a small market with 7 employees and he can't afford to pay the minimum wage because when Bernie Sanders went up and said, raise the minimum wage, Jeff Bezos, to $15 an hour. And you know what Jeff said? Oh, thank you, Bernie. You just put out 50% of my competition. I will gladly raise it to $15. And our Mr. Socialist, thank you for eliminating my competition. Why? Because none of my competitors in Toledo, Kansas can raise the minimum wage for $15 an hour because it's impossible. He officially put people out of business. The argument that you could have made for me to say that makes sense is, what does that Joey do that runs a small market? How do I help that guy out? Him and his wife have been running that business for 60 years now. They're passing on to their kids. That place has got, my dad worked out at 99 cents, or people would come. They knew him. David, I once gave a talk in front of a couple thousand people, and I kept talking about my dad, David, and where the 99 cent store was on Englewood. And he says, what does David look like? I said, like this. He says, I went to David every week. It was an emotional moment for me because it's like they wanted to go to him. There is an argument there, but there is no argument on prices going up today, Richard. That argument doesn't have weight today.
I think it always did. That's why we have...
Not today.
Sure it does. It's the same argument that has existed all through the history of...
Not today, though. Not today. Sure. Where today? What is expensive today?
Let's everything that you buy is expensive because you're an economy that has been monopolized now for decades.
I don't know about monopolized.
Well,
They don't know about monopolized.
how many competitors to Amazon do you think there are?
Depends on what product you're talking about. If you're
In
talking about
general,
Prime, if
in
you're talking
general.
about their,
In general, most people these days are buying online from a very small number of general providers.
yeah, like I said to you, I am concerned about Amazon moving to DC to hire the best lobbyists and pay them the best money to make it harder for small business owners to compete them with the help of government.
But you're then just jumping into the story at a particular moment. Amazon understood. First, it has to destroy all the little department stores and everything that they've done, just like Walmart. One as a deliverer, the other one as a brick and mortar. Okay? They did that over the last 40 years in cooperation with the People's Republic of China, for whom they became the mass distributor. They took care of wiping out 9/10 of their competition. Now they have a de facto monopoly. They want to, and they can in many areas, raise prices above cost because they have no competitor. But let me finish, there's a risk. There's a risk that people like you and people like me become critics, and that we can reach the victims who are overpaying with our criticism about their operating a monopoly. They know that. How do they deal with that? Buy the Washington Post if you're Jeffrey Bezos. Put yourself in a position to shape the narrative so that you can now get the government to do what capitalists always want the government to do, namely to reinforce, to protect, and to extend whatever their needs are. And in this case, it's the need to perpetuate a monopoly position they were able to acquire. That's what they do.
I agree.